Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the November 12th, 2021 meeting of the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee of the Vermont Climate Council. So today's agenda, we will be going over, so I'll just go over the minutes. They're linked in the agenda. Take a review of the feedback from the Climate Council meeting on November 9th. And then we're going to be talking with our task leads, reviewing the foundational criteria tables by strategy. We'll be talking through that. Marion is going to talk about the glossary of terms, and then we'll identify some next steps and public comment at the end and adjourn by 3. Any changes to the agenda needed, or any questions about the minutes that are linked in the agenda? Alrighty. Okay, so I guess I'm up for
I can help you out, Erica, if that's helpful. So I sent out an email earlier today, and I can share my screen with that document with the table that we used with the meeting with you and Catherine and task leads on Monday prior to the council meeting, that took the survey responses that council members submitted, and we worked on crafting some responses prior to the meeting on Tuesday. And then I also received the minutes from the meeting this morning, which had notes of the verbal feedback that were provided at the meeting on Tuesday. So I think what would be helpful, and if this sounds like a good process, is to work through that table. A lot of these already have responses, but to ensure we're clear on where edits are needed in the draft and who's going to take those edits on for final revisions to the rural resilience cap sections. And okay. I can share my screen with that table. I made some minor changes because some of the comments that were talked about at the council meeting were the same ones that were received in the survey. So it's a little duplicative. So I combined those where appropriate.
Marion, how are these responses going to be shared with the council?
They'll be posted together with the final documents. So next Tuesday, by end of the day, I'll probably post on Wednesday, is when section 12, so rural resilience's section of the cap, should be posted both in a sort of final with clean version in a PDF form, and then a version with track changes as well, so the council can see where edits were made after they reviewed it on Tuesday of this week. And then together with that, we'll post this table that they can go through and say, okay, here was my comment, and here's what the subcommittee responded to, either made a change or didn't make a change, and here's why.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So do you want me to share my screen? You can pull that up. I can just walk through quickly what I did here. Again, a lot of these are comments that we received both through the survey ahead of Tuesday, and then we also discussed them at the council meeting on Tuesday. So the comment is here. You'll see the response to the comment. This is what we discussed on Monday prior to the council meeting. And then this is a summary of what was discussed at the council meeting that David Plum with CBI wrote up for the minutes. So I've put those in the same response to comment box so we can see those all together.
Hey, Marion, the file that you sent out earlier has some grayed out boxes. Is there a reason why some of the comments, like the number 1 comment, that has the text is in gray and not black, is not included in this what you're showing?
So that was a comment from Chris Cochran of the subcommittee about process. So I decided to gray it out because I didn't think we needed to respond to it. We certainly could, but it was a general comment around timeline and process.
And I think we just got an email from Mike Burke to say that there's probably to say there's power outages and they're dealing with it. Yeah. Storm trouble.
So I think we should work through these comments. Again, some of these we've discussed already, but I'd like to just make a note in here to ensure we're clear on if we're going to make a change to the draft section of the cap and who's going to make that edit or change as needed as we work through this, so that we're clear on responsibilities after this. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, so this comment was around evaluating and eliminating statutory barriers to school and municipal solar. I think there was a lot of discussion at the council meeting around this comment not getting to the intent of the specific action. And the response was that they'll clarify the focus of the recommendation and that it was on financing, and we didn't discuss nest metering in this particular comment, but that will take up suggestion of referring to cost-effective programs. And the comment here was also noting that the person would stand behind a rewording of the recommendation that talked about striking, that either struck, eliminate statutory barriers, or replace the phrase developed cost-effective programs to support school municipal solar.
Do we want to change the language? And I'm looking at you, Anne. Would you be supportive of changing the language in the where it actually is to reflect that?
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm not on video. Just multitasking here with but yes, that looks like a good edit to me.
So I can't remember, was this in pathway 2 or pathway 3?
This, I think this was in pathway
3.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, so I was looking at Ann Lawless.
I'm so
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I think it is in pathway 3, and there's another reference to something that's similar to that, that's lower down in this document. I don't see a problem to the suggestion. I think it's a good suggestion.
So it sounds like pathway 3 group will taking out eliminate statutory barriers and replace with develop cost-effective programs to support. Is that what we're agreeing on?
What do you see there, Dave? Because they're actually quite different.
I agree with, I sort of agree with the suggested change, but because unless we're citing specifically what the statutory barrier is, the developing a cost-effective program for schools and municipalities seems better to me.
It seems like it's a bigger envelope.
Yep.
So we're going to incorporate the suggested language.
Yep.
I think so.
Okay, great. Okay, so there's a couple of comments in this next one. And it goes on for a bit, so we'll have to work through them one by one. The first one was in pathway 1, strategy 1, the climate impacts for the toolkit should help towns in planning, should talk about high winds and heavy rain, hail, and sleet. So on that particular one, this was the response given at the council meeting. I think Eric and Catherine said that was the intent of this section, but they could make it more specific to refer to heavy rain and high winds. So is that something we want to add there? Okay.
Yeah.
I think this also relates to another comment that's in here. I just wanted to offer that in addition to making it clear that the toolkit would also address these other risks. There was another comment that suggested some additional language, and I think it perhaps would be best in the pathway introduction to better specify some of the other climate risks.
Good idea.
That way we don't have to list every single climate risk in every single action.
Which introduction are you talking about? The introduction to the strategy?
Let's see.
Or the pathway?
Probably the pathway, because I think the idea is that the comment, and again, we can address that when we get to it, but I read the comment as saying include a broader scope of climate risk.
Was that comment? Oh, and I didn't extend the numbers. Whoops. Was it this
think it was-
particular comment?
Leslie
Ann's.
Yeah, Leslie Ann's comment,
Yeah.
because she had offered some resources as well that she was including in
Mhm.
the introduction section, and it would be good to tie that in, keep it consistent throughout the plan.
Yep. Yeah, she referenced some additional materials here that could work both for the opening section, the framing of hazards, as well as in the pathway 1 frame up. Okay, thanks for pointing that out, Bronwyn. All right, so the next suggestion here was pathway 1 strategy 3 aims to advance equitable resilience, but neither of these actions address that.
Yeah.
So the subcommittee clarified it relates to the statutory charge, and it was more about the assessment piece. There are those, again, those tables that we're going to discuss in a bit, but we could also broaden pathway 2. Oh, whoops, that's different. So that those tables address equitable program design, but I don't know if there's any changes we want to make to that language. In addition, we don't have to make changes. I think that's the other thing, is if folks are providing comments either through the survey or at the council meeting, we just can respond to it in this table if we don't see that it's necessary to actually make changes to the draft. Just,
I think for this one, I mean, I would want to see what's in the table, I guess. And it was like when I'm reading through it, I get the comment. So I'm wondering if, we were trying to like accommodate a couple of different statutory requirements. And so I just want to, and maybe I'm just dense and I just don't understand it enough to know that they're related, but so maybe the table will tie it together a little bit more. If not, we need to probably clarify it.
okay. So perhaps we come back to this one after we take a look at the table.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. For pathway 4 strategy 1, should we add as an action relocating wastewater treatment facilities away from rivers and lakes, both to reduce the chance the facility will be damaged in flooding and to improve water quality? So at the council meeting, I think Catherine and Erica talked about that there's not a one-size-fits-all solution for this issue, but that's part of the reason for including that toolkit and assessment work. There's no specific suggestion, but language can be strengthened after the meeting.
I think there's a couple of actions in pathway 4 for sure, as well as pathway 2, about assessing climate risks for wastewater treatment facilities, water supplies, and I think we could probably maybe add in there, including but not limited to removing those facilities out of flood risk. Where it fits in the most. I think that the intent is not to exclude removing those facilities and finding another place for them. Maybe it's just about being more explicit in 1 or 2 of the actions that are already referencing that. As it relates to the wastewater pieces, the water wastewater pieces, I felt like that they were covered significantly in pathway 2 and pathway 4.
Okay, so are you suggesting changing some of the actions under pathway 2 and pathway 4 to talk explicitly about the option of potential relocation of facilities?
Yeah, and if I had the thing right in front of me, I'd be able to point to maybe where, like, suggest a spot where it would best fit, but I just don't have it in front of me right now. So.
Okay. So for task leads for those 2 pathways, this would be assigned to you all to work on. So Joe, is this making sense to you, and is something that you could adjust perhaps for one of the actions?
I was just looking to see if I could find something that's already in there, and under pathway 3, under the water section, pathway 3 strategy D, I guess it is expand public. Expand public investment, particularly hazard mitigation funding, to flood-proof or relocate drinking water and wastewater treatment infrastructure at significant risk of flooding when flood damaged or during end-of-life refurbishment. So I think it's the same thing. Does it sound close enough to everybody?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, right. A lot of
So-
some of these comments I felt like may have been just, we had to point people to where the information they're looking for was, because
Yeah.
there's just so much in there too. Sometimes it's just hard to read it before you read it a second time. And so then I don't think there needs to be any change then, because it's there covered.
Yep, so we'll just note that in this table that under pathway 3, strategy D
Yeah.
addresses that concern.
And I think it's a little more holistic. It's to evaluate it and determine whether, it can be sort of hardened there, or should it be relocated? I think that's really the logical thing to do.
And is it pathway 2, Joe, or 3?
Yeah, you're,
I say, sorry, pathway 2.
I think it's probably pathway 2. Yep,
strategy 3,
there we go.
strategy 3, and then D, action D.
Great. Okay. Okay, and then the other comment, and this is something I also pulled from the comments at the council meeting specifically, but the last thing this person had to say was about whether we should be thinking about historic villages and how many are located on rivers and in floodplains. How do we grapple with that notion that it may make more sense to relocate some villages in their entirety? And so from the council meeting, Catherine and Erica talked about this not being a one-size-fits-all solution for communities. The idea is to have them tools that makes it accessible for them based on their vulnerability assessments and risks for their villages, may need to relocate structures and could look at other solutions. But I don't know if Bronwyn or others involved in this conversation think that it warrants any changes to the text.
Is it remotely possible that we would relocate a village? It seems, I know they used to do that way back.
I do recall Chris Campany putting something in the chat about plans to relocate a village after I ran in
Wilmington,
his
yeah,
area, and it
something
didn't
about
go very well. Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, like, there are definitely examples all over the country of very, like a small number of examples all over the country where, villages have been moved out of the way. And Chris Campany had actually posted a few examples in the chat during the council meeting. I think it would have to be a confluence of events that would maybe, I think it would be a very remote chance that any village, no matter how small, would get moved completely.
I don't think of it as a low-hanging fruits strategy. So similar to what other folks are saying, I don't think of this as being something that is so likely to be needed that it needs to be addressed in the climate action plan now. I think we have a lot of other steps around resilience that we need to explore first before we would talk about relocating an entire village. Just looking at what other communities are doing, you have a lot of talk about coastal flooding, and those communities are not up and leaving, right? They're hardening their infrastructure to it. So it's not to say that it might not be needed. There's certainly examples of other communities who have had, tornadoes come through and wipes out the whole community, but I don't think that's what we're talking about yet. That's not the type of impact that we're expecting to see in our communities. So it seems a little soon to be elevating that in the climate action plan as a really key thing to be talking about.
We also likely would not have rated that as a high priority item. So remembering that these actions are high priority actions, and adding an action in means you have to go through the entire assessment process, and it's unlikely that that would have been high priority.
Great. So I think the response we have is sufficient for that particular one. Okay, so that's it for this commenter. Moving on to the next one. This was a comment around increasing efforts and funding towards pollution prevention programs at wastewater facilities. Commenter was unclear what the link is to resilience or climate change. And then also the water infrastructure description of pathway 2 does not match well with how we talk about water infrastructure in Vermont. So on the water infrastructure language not aligned with the typical approach, Neil came in, provided a number of edits after discussion with Secretary Moore on this. So I think we are all set on those edits, right, Joe? I've incorporated those into the version.
Yeah, I sent you whatever Neil came in, put in, so I think we should be all set. Yeah,
Yep.
Talking about gray water and this one, it was, I think there were some language issues and some other things, and I think Neil addressed those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I incorporated those into the version on SharePoint. And then just the other one on the link between pollution prevention and wastewater facilities, there was discussion around a sentiment that pollution in waterways means that a community needs help and there's a lot of intrusion in water treatment facilities. One council member felt that this could be a stretch, but others felt that it tapped into climate infrastructure. So I think there was a lot of discussion about this. I don't know if Erica, you felt like there were any changes needed based on this conversation, or if the response that we have is sufficient just to keep that in the table.
No, and it's not like we have a multi-pronged strategy on pollution prevention. It's a one action, I think, that is, or one, I think it was like one action within the strategy. There was more support within the council to include it than there was to exclude it.
Go ahead, Ben.
One of the reasons it's important to reference water quality is because some of the actions pertain to the Flood Resilient Community Fund, and we're essentially using ARPA funds to do flood mitigation. And in order to use the ARPA funds, we have to demonstrate that there's a water quality nexus. So we're tying the co-benefits of reducing water pollution by doing flood mitigation. It's inherent to the eligibility. So I would, if only for ARPA compliance reasons, I would encourage us not to disconnect water quality from flood resilience. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
When there's flooding, there's sediment loading and there's more pollution. So they are tied together.
Right. Okay, so we'll keep that in there, and I don't think it warrants any changes in the draft. Okay, the next comment was unclear how to implement the recommendations from the AOT study evaluating road usage charges, such as flat fee, mileage-based fee per kilowatt hour to replace the decline in state motor fuel taxes resulting from vehicle electrification. Unclear how that's a resilience and adaptation strategy. So the response provided at the council meeting was that we're trying to find how to make up money for costs of these plans for vehicle electrification. Council and subcommittee felt it was too early to put these recommendations in here, as it needs to be given to the legislature for discussion. It will be noted in the document that this is an issue to be addressed and find resolution for. So Joe, I know you were involved in that conversation. Are there some changes we want to make to this particular action?
Yeah, didn't get very many or any positive reaction to that particular suggestion. There was no love for this action. I think, I sort of feel like we should just remove it. I think that, even Secretary Flynn was, didn't seem too supportive of incorporating it. I had briefed him beforehand, but I must have missed something in the correspondence. And I think if it was going to be in the plan someplace, it really should be in the cross-sector mitigation section, and where there's just a comment that, the, if we reach our targets on EV adoption, there's consequences to that on funding, but I don't want to complicate matters. It's an issue that we're going to be dealing with, and we're going to figure it out whether it's in the cap or not. I'm okay with just removing it if other folks don't have a problem with that. I think let's keep it simple at this point.
Anybody have any disagreements with Joe's approach? Okay, great. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah.
All right, so then the last one from this comment, Pathway 4 Strategy 1 talks about preempting sprawl, but the actions don't seem well matched to this pathway or strategy. And I don't have the response for that one.
You do. It was on number 3 right there.
Oh, it was? Wait, up here?
No, low down. Wasn't it right there, bottom of the page?
Moving it to section 15. That's true. We did move it to section 15. I just thought, well, I'd have to go back and look at my notes from David, because I know we talked about this one in the council meeting. So there's a summary of what we talked about.
All right, so was this just the Pathway 4 Strategy 1?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I went in and made an edit, and I think it's just a vestige of old language from when the two used to be together. So if you just delete the language, it starts to make a lot more sense and it no longer focuses on sprawl.
And you made that change already, Bronwyn?
Yes, I did, and track changes in the shared document.
Great. Perfect. Okay. Moving on to the next comment. This was one about drought impacts on drinking water systems and feeling like it was absent from the draft. So for this particular one, the subcommittee talked about impacts were not called out hazard by hazard. All impacts of hydrology will be upfront in the section, as it's not just about drought impacts on drinking water. There were not any specific recommendations given, but folks could send recommendations to the subcommittee. I don't think we've received any.
I went back through and it's referenced several times, drought.
Okay.
So it just probably wasn't easy for people to find as a hazard, but we didn't, like I said, we didn't organize this hazard by hazard.
Great. Okay, and then the other comment here was under strategy 3, expand cross-sector collaboration to align efforts, share best practices, and leverage resources. Does not seem well aligned with the strategy. So I think this was the one that spoke to requirements called out in the Global Warming Solutions Act, could add stronger actions under the strategy that reference building cross-sector collaboration, but some of those actions were pulled out for the cross-cutting section.
There was also, there was also a note on, I'd like to see a climate assessment, risk assessment for the entire commercial sector, although it's right in there. That's what it says. So, and it was like, we called out those two industries specifically because they're in the GWSA. I don't, again, the tenor of the conversation kind of just validated what was said in the action.
Mm-hmm. We did receive one comment later on referencing some research around the impact of climate change on the logging industry and a request to add logging to sugaring and ski operations. Don't know how folks feel about that one, but we could jump down to that one.
I'll wait to see what everybody has to say first.
Thoughts on including the logging industry in discussion of further impact assessments in addition to ski and sugaring? I did not include the link to the article here, but there was an article sent.
I think it was more to make that more general rather than saying even, or maybe that was another comment on another one, but like, instead of calling out those two specific industries, is there a general term that you can use? Resource, land-based, I don't know, something like that.
I think that's where we started, was with a very general recommendation. And then it was pointed out that we needed to specifically call out these industries because it was in
Yeah.
the legislation. And I think we were in this tricky space of having an action that spoke very directly to the legislation, but then trying to find a strategy, an umbrella strategy that fit. But so we created this umbrella strategy that sounds much more broad and much more general, but we didn't actually have actions beyond those very specific ones with those specific industries. So I very much understand why it feels like a little bit of a mismatch. And I'm not entirely sure where to go with that from here. Because obviously you could see an interest in calling out every single industry by name. So.
Could we change it to say, and I don't know the exact action language, but study the impacts of climate change on, as Joe said, something like industries that work closely with the land or industries that rely heavily on natural products, and then say such as ski industry, sugaring industry, logging industry. So it's included in there and referenced specifically, but it doesn't preclude others from potentially being included in that study once it's implemented.
Could you say including sugaring and logging, and the other one, but not limited to, just so nobody feels left out?
Yeah, we can certainly.
And suggested Vermont's natural resource-based industries.
That's good.
Yeah, that's good. I think it needs to say, because that's where we started, was something very general. So I do think it needs to say, we can say Vermont's natural resource-based industries, such as, but not limited to.
Yeah.
And that'll solve that issue.
Are we adding logging here?
Sure.
Okay, and then remind me which pathway this is under.
Pathway 1, strategy 3.
Okay, so is this assigned to you, Bronwyn, to make the change?
Yes, it is.
Great. Perfect. Okay. And then the last comment is we already addressed this one about water infrastructure pieces. Okay. Next comment, a couple here under pathway 3, strategy 2, talking about developing a program to establish weatherization navigators and asking are RPCs the appropriate place for such staff? Why wouldn't we reference Efficiency Vermont or community action agencies? So there's a lot of conversation around this one. I think the recommended change would talk about having these weatherization navigators in multiple places, an acknowledgement that there's a lot of weatherization that needs to happen, and we'll need all the support that we can have, that we can get from partners such as these. So also add language that includes the importance of coordination among navigators and how this is a whole systems approach beyond weatherization. So that, I think we wrapped that one up pretty cleanly, unless folks think there are other changes we should make. But I'll assign this to the pathway 3 group. Does that sound good? And Anne, you and I can work on language for this one.
Yep, that
Great.
seems good.
Perfect. Okay. And then the next comment, I actually don't know if we've addressed this one. Someone thought that the PACE program had ended for lack of uptake. Does the PACE program still exist? So Dave or Anne or Chad, do you all know the answer to this one? Because we talked about the PACE program quite a bit, so I assumed it did still exist. But.
I looked it up. I found a document that's a PDF from 2016 on the Efficiency Vermont website. So, you know, it says right at the top, it's 2016, so it looks old. So I called Efficiency Vermont, and the frontline, you know, customer service people said it doesn't exist. I
Yeah.
said, well, it's on your website. He said, okay, we'll take it down.
And
Yeah.
you have your hand up. Oh, go ahead, Chad.
And-
Sorry.
Sorry, and was that the residential program or the commercial? Because in my recollection, there was a residential one, but there may never have been a commercial or community scale PACE
This one
program.
looked like it was residential. I can find the
Yeah.
link if it's
That
still
makes
there.
sense. That makes sense. So for what we're talking about here, Marion, which is community scale stuff, there has not been a PACE program for that. So the recommendation probably should be to establish one.
Anne Margolis, you've had your hand up. Go ahead.
Thanks. I think we had sent some concepts around PACE, and the residential PACE was a thing and then it wasn't. There were some very clear barriers into implementing residential PACE, but there are some newly emergent or pretty successful financing tools in the residential space that we had sent some specific language on. I think you might have that, Marion. I'm not sure if it made it to the whole pathway 3 group, but for example, bonding to support a statewide tariffed on-bill finance pilot, funding for a revolving loan fund for public serving institutions, and potentially funding to support interest rate buy downs in Efficiency Vermont's home energy loan and business energy loan programs. So I don't know if you want to get really specific or you want to say very general, but we do have those very specific ideas for where targeted funding could really make a difference in the residential efficiency retrofit space. So I can pop those in the chat if it's useful, or if you would rather stay generic, I understand that too.
How do you all feel about that, Chad and Dave?
Sounds
Um,
good.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the actual action as it's written. It says evaluate all existing programs and consider increased funding. And the existing programs may include, so it doesn't actually talk about exploring new programs. Although the next item does, the next one is C. Well, no, those are education programs. So it seems like we might need to tweak that a little bit.
It
To
sounds
say-
like taking PACE out of existing programs, adjusting the action, a new action to represent new programs, with some of the
Yeah,
recommendations that Anne has.
Add new programs and change the word existing to existing or past or something. Evaluate.
Well, do we
existing and
still, I
past
think based on Anne's recommendation, do we still want to include reference to the PACE program, considering there were some barriers to successful implementation there?
Maybe we should take a relook at it. I looked it up. It is a program that's available nationally. And some states are probably more active than Vermont, but if it didn't work in Vermont for whatever reason, we should maybe take another look and see why.
I think it's important. So PACE residential, yes, a lot of barriers. I think commercial PACE is still functioning in some places fairly well. So I would suggest leaving that in to evaluate it, but very much support a whole new action item that says explore new programs that have some promise, all the ones that Anne mentioned.
So yes, Anne, I think I have that email. I'll have to find it. I don't remember if I forwarded it along or not. If so, my apologies.
It's in the chat
So we
now.
can, and I have that in the chat too. Perfect. Great. So pathway 3 we can work on some language for this and then make sure it is referenced correctly in the document. Great. Okay. Anything else on that one, or can we move on to the next
Good.
comment here? Perfect. All right. So this comment was around how to measure, prioritize, and begin to advance strategies through rulemaking process, legislative process. That said, there are a few instances where this is a level of detail where more flexibility or another approach may be considered helpful. So talking really about measuring and prioritizing these actions. So I think, we talked about this quite a bit. Some of these recommendations have to do with the capacity to actually establish those metrics. And I think, Bronwyn, you said it well, that we need vulnerability assessments so those measures can be set and established before we actually use them for tracking. And I think that was discussed at the council meeting quite a bit, but I don't think there were any changes that were needed unless folks heard differently.
Maybe, and just to put a finer point on my previous comment too, I mean, vulnerability assessments, at what scale, for what sectors, all these metrics, there's a huge world. And I know we've said this before, I'll say it again. Resilience metrics are not as simple as mitigation metrics. Mitigation is greenhouse gas, CO2e, that's it. Resilience metrics, depends. Are you looking at it, the most impactful things at the state level, the most impactful things at a community level, most impactful for a specific industry, most impactful for an individual. So, I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done to really framing up what are we talking about when we're talking about resilience? What are the big picture goals? And then scaling it down to the appropriate levels of implementation. And I think that has to happen before we can really think about metrics that demonstrate progress.
Great. And then we also talked about discussion of measuring and assessing progress, and the further work that is needed is going to be talked about in the CAP. So I don't think we need to make any changes there, and this is a good response to include in this table. Okay. And then comment 8 is also about the weatherization navigators, and it's a similar comment. So I can just combine those.
Yeah.
And then comment 9, recommendation that community action agencies be identified as the entities that the state can quickly seek to resource to address the most frontline and marginalized communities and residents with services. So in discussion at the council meeting, we talked about changing the name to community action networks to expand the concept. And then discussing individual assistance post-disaster for marginalized communities. And I think, Erica, you noted needing to talk about that further outside of the meeting. But I don't know if there's any additional language we want to change.
I think in the table, and I need to revisit that. If you can just I'll put that down as I need to look at that in the table. I think that's where that needs to go.
In the strategy table or in this table, the comment table?
Strategy table.
Okay.
Because the action itself is probably not going to change. It's her comments are on the actual implementation and design of the program. And so that's why I was like it was only for that reason I was struggling on how to incorporate it into the plan. So I think that's where it needs to get incorporated in the tables.
Okay. Do we need to change community action agencies to community action network or networks, as was discussed?
That's fine. Ben, do you have a comment?
I just had a quick question. In that same box, it says on communication action agencies. Do we mean community action agencies?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, so are we changing community action agencies and the reference to that in the action to community action networks?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Is there, should it be capitalized? Is there an entity called Community Action Networks?
No.
So let's keep it in lowercase, like community action agencies above.
It would almost be established community action networks, which could include CAP agencies and others.
Sorry, so you're noting we need to establish community action networks? That seems like a separate action.
Well, you can't reference a community action network when one doesn't exist, I wouldn't think.
I think it's just a looser term, because there's the community action, the CAP agencies, then there's kind of the other support entities that, you know, are supported by the CAP agencies. And that's what she was loosely referring to. If this is going to create confusion, maybe it's the CAP agencies and supported networks, and just call it good. I think that meets the intent.
Okay.
Okay. All right, and then Erica's going to take a look at the action table as well, or excuse me, strategy table. Okay, so these are a couple of other comments that were not discussed in the meeting. Rather, they were either Catherine received them through chat during the meeting, or we received them as written comment right after the meeting. So this one was from Leslie Ann, Dr. Dupigny-Giroux, asking about whether when we refer to the toolkit, are we talking also about the climate resilience toolkit? Catherine, I think, said yes, but I think we'll just want to expand that action to ensure that the climate resilience toolkit is referenced there. Does that seem on par with one of the tools that could be sort of included in the toolkit? Because I think the action references both existing and new tools. Is that right, Bronwyn? So perhaps just adding in climate resilience toolkit into that list would work for this one. Okay. So this is again the one about logging, which we've already addressed. And then this is another one from Leslie Ann talking about offering a specific resource for helping to round out the framing of natural hazards, and then the latest materials on Tropical Storm Irene. So she's referencing that we could use this for the framing of the overall section that you wrote, Erica. So I can send that comment to you if you want to look at any revisions there. She doesn't get really specific, so I don't know specifically what changes we would make, but I think just talking about the framing up of the hazards so that it's clear for the pathways and strategies beyond that. Okay. And okay, and then we had a couple of really specific comments from Secretary Moore about the document. In the framing section, she talks about a sentence that talks about the risk that flooding poses, and she wants to clarify that this is fluvial erosion, not for the most part inundation flooding.
Sure.
Okay. This is in the framing section, so this will have to go to you, Erica. And then in line 150, action D, assistance for drinking water systems that are imperiled by drought. We've already addressed that. Okay. And then a question around one of the actions under pathway 3. So there's an action around collecting fossil fuel usage data. And she's asking about who is the data being collected for and where is this reported?
I have some comments on that.
Okay, great.
It's basically to require the collection of fossil fuel usage data at the municipal level for buildings, fleets, vehicle fleets, and utilities. Identify data gaps and ways to collect that data for measuring change in fossil fuel use going forward. The answer to her comment is in B, the next action. Ensure data on fossil fuel usage at the municipal level is available and accessible in one location for municipal and public use. So my only suggestion would be to consider rephrasing A, instead of saying require the collection of fossil fuel usage data at the municipal level, just change it. Say require the collection of municipal fossil fuel usage data for buildings, da 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 da. It just makes it more clear that this is municipal data that we're looking at, that we want to have the action be about.
Okay. That sounds good to me, Anne. Any objections to that? All right.
No.
Last comment. So action 1, I didn't note which pathway it was under. Sorry about that. Well, these are all great ideas and possibilities. Shoot, I should probably pull up the specific action.
I looked at it, Mary,
Okay.
and I couldn't, because it references line 547. So I looked there, and that's about entities that provide rebates for weatherization, should stabilize values year to year. I Googled electric customer subsidy. I mean, I searched for it in the document. I couldn't find it.
Okay.
It could be lines 552 to 558. Let's see, which.
Give me just a moment. I can pull it up right here.
Okay.
I just have to find it. Give me one moment.
I don't know exactly what they do with that level. But I'm sure they get some, it's not do anything. And my guess is they may do some stuff done.
Okay. Oh yeah, I must have put in the wrong line number. Sorry about that.
I couldn't find it. I couldn't find what the commenter referenced in particular, which was electric customer subsidy. I thought maybe it was A and B. Let's see.
Okay, here, I found it. I'll stop
Okay, good.
sharing this and then I'll share the actual comment. Give me a second here. All right, so this is the action: provide funding to assist low-income homeowners to upgrade electric service to 200 amps. Electric utilities and renewable energy developers could provide new incentives and financing options through third-party financing mechanisms, on-bill financing, Res Tier 3, third-party purchase agreements, and grants. All programs must include access to renters. So Liz was saying these are all great ideas. This is core infrastructure upgrade for Vermonters, and given our housing stock, this should be considered strongly for direct infrastructure funding or grants or financing, rather than electric customer subsidy, which just puts the pressure on electrical rates. So she would suggest adding infrastructure grant support or similar to the list. Explicitly, the word grant appears, but the lead is payment by electric customers through utilities, which should probably be secondary if there's other support available. So she's generally suggesting adding the word or adding infrastructure grant support. All right, we have 2 hands up. Anne, I don't know who was up first, so go ahead, Anne.
I think Ben might have been first, and I actually have a comment on this, but also the one prior to this that I was a little late to the game. I found this one, ratepayer, hat on. It seems like similar to some of the ones we had in Pathway 2, where we suggested, seek infrastructure and other federal and non-ratepayer funding too. So that could be a way to approach this one, in the provide funding to, seek non-ratepayer funding, or, seek funding that doesn't add rate pressure. I mean, some of this will potentially fall on utilities because it is electrification, and that is to their, there's more sales across which to, spread the electric system costs. So some of this could sensibly fall in the ratepayer bucket, but it'd be good to keep those options open. And would you mind if I just backed up to the previous one? On the municipal energy, I think the rewording, I think someone could look at it and say, is this for like the municipal, the granularity is the municipal, like the town level, which I think is what we're getting at. I think the wording here makes it look like it could be interpreted as just collection of the fossil fuel use by the municipality as an entity, like the town how much does the town, as town government, consume? If we mean town level, I think the actor in this is important, and the mechanism, right now, the only kind of way to get at this is through not consumption. We don't, that would be consumption of every single individual and their fossil fuel use, which is, there's privacy issues. And so it would be actually sales of fossil fuels, gallons, of fossil fuels sold to individuals in a municipality. And right now that's all aggregated up. It's part of tax filings, but only based on the location of the fuel dealer, and it's not broken out by municipality. So just, I don't really know who the actor is here. It probably requires looking at privacy issues and how data is collected, and how taxes are assessed on fossil fuel sellers. So I'm not really sure how we want to get at this, but I think it's a bigger nut. And we've been trying to crack it at the Department of Public Service, trying to figure out who can do this, how can we get this? It feels like it's swimming uphill. I think seek to, or figure out how to, or seek legislative changes that will enable, or something, rather than just saying get it, because I feel like that will come to the department and we'll say our hands are tied. The only place to get that is through taxes, and it's not even collected properly.
You can go ahead, Ann Lellis, if you want to respond to that.
Thank you. I remember us discussing this way back when we were just first developing the actions under the pathways. And we did think about that, all about the privacy issues, which is why I think our intention was to keep this focused at the fuel usage at the municipal level. So it's, what does a town use to heat its library? What does a town use to, for its vehicle fleet? And just keep it limited to that. That was our intention, I think.
When we did
I think it would be helpful to, I'm sorry.
Whoops. I was just going to say, when we did our municipal energy audits here back in the days of ARA, that's exactly what the auditors do. They collect the data from the historic data from the town, so they can measure savings or going forward.
I was going to offer, having done more municipal inventories than I care to remember. I think, because I actually read this the same way, that this is municipal level, as in the municipality as a community. I would just add the word operations, municipal operations. So that way it's clear that these are fuel bills that the municipality should have because they're paying them. So it's fuel for the library, it's fuel for the fleet vehicles. It's not the entire fleet that's registered in a municipality.
Okay, so I think we have the change there, which would be to rephrase it to talk about municipal operation, or some rephrasing so that it's clear that we're talking about municipal operation fuel data, not the entire municipality. Great. Okay. Do we need to go back to that other comment? You can find it from Liz Miller. I think we could take her suggestion and just add, and add what Anne said about provide options that don't, what was the wording you gave, Anne, that don't fall into the ratepayer?
I think it was in the provide funding to assist. It would be maybe seek federal and other non-ratepayer sources of funding for. So at the very beginning where it says provide.
Oh, okay. So say that again. It was seek.
Seek federal and other non-Vermont ratepayer funding. To the extent possible, or something like that, to not to say that that's off the table.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, and I can make that change in the SharePoint version. Great. Okay. So that is it for comments that we received. Everything else was conversation at the council meeting, but it all referenced comments we'd received in the survey. Is there anything else that folks heard at the council meeting that we didn't address here? Okay. So I'll clean up this table and send out the assignments for edits that need to be made. There aren't too many that need to be made here, which is good. So we'll want to make those changes to the SharePoint document that I think all the task leads have access to, and we can change it in there. And then that will be the final version, in track changes, and then a clean version that we'll post online, as well as the cleaned up response table, which I'll send out today for folks to review before posting on Tuesday. Okay, I think it's it for that section, Erica, if you want to jump to the next item on the agenda.
Yeah, so our next item is looking at with the task lead, looking at our tables. So I don't have a particular plan for this section of the plan, but I wondered if we could maybe just share, I don't know if you can share the shared documents that you have and just where we're at, and kind of go pathway by pathway with the task leads to see if there are any questions or any clarifications that we need to make. As a reminder, folks, we have, I think, until Tuesday, right, Marion, to finish our edits on this section.
Yep, that's correct. So this is the shared document, again, that task leads have access to. I think we are it looks like pretty well set with the action tables, or excuse me, strategy tables. I don't know if folks, do you want to go through each one specifically, or have the task leads talk more broadly about the process and any remaining questions?
I think the latter. I mean, we don't have to go through them, line by line at all, but especially if there are any questions, or if anybody needs to bring anything back to the group to clarify detail for the tables.
Okay. So I think then I'll turn it over to you, Bronwyn, for Pathway 1 Strategy 1, Tools and Resources to Help Communities. Any wise words on this process?
Nope, it was as we expected. It's a lot of generalizing and a lot of, this still needs to happen. I guess the one question, and maybe this is more of a question for you, Marion and Jane, with impact, I was noticing that, it would be nice if it was just like a one statement, high impact, medium impact, low impact, similar to the spreadsheet. I didn't start with that. I started with the comments about the, so I don't know if that would help make this a little bit more to the point or readable. But essentially all of the ones that I did, it doesn't just lay out, that category that we used in the prioritization process.
Yeah, and I was noticing not so much for impact, but a similar thing with cost effectiveness, because it was that like impact versus the actual cost of the action. And then that's what got you to cost effectiveness. So I was looking at that for pathway 3 of like, how do I explain cost effectiveness using the definitions that we used for this? And I could see a similar, like maybe we just note, the high impact, medium impact, what it was before the sort of summary of comments. But yeah, I don't know how you feel about that, Jane. Because not everything is high impact.
Yeah, I guess I haven't given this a lot of thought when you're lumping up at the strategy level, how you're going to speak to that component of the work. But I think it would be important to speak to, in some way, like the ranking associated with the actions that lie underneath the strategies. So like, rather than just the comments associated with them all, if there was some sort of overall ranking or just overall consensus you could be giving to the actions and their broad impact, or elevating particular ones of interest, or any kind of specific comment that gets at that nature of like high overall or medium overall that you could state would feel helpful here to me. But I also think if this is the best approach, like best you can do, it's fine. I'll have to read it.
Yeah, I would say like, sorry.
Sorry, I was just gonna, I could drop in. I think Ag and Eco took a varied approach to this, Marion, if I remember correctly. Like some of them, like in the mitigation, well, not mitigation, that's a bad example because they did impact table, they did tables by action still. Yeah, sometimes they reference the rankings and do it in a way that makes sense to me, and others are pretty generic, the tables. So it's different throughout.
I was just going to point out that I think on average, all of the actions, the reason they're in here is because they were high, with a couple that got pulled out from, you know, a lower medium for equity purposes or something of that sort. But so I mean, I guess it's a little bit strange. So I would say on average at the strategy level, all of the strategies are high impact, you know, either high impact or just the impact is that they will have is pretty critical to moving the plan on the whole and reaching the goals. So I guess that's the only thing I would flag is that at the strategy level, again, it was just a little bit, it might not speak as directly to the criteria. So that's not true. Sorry. It speaks to the criteria, but not necessarily in the way that we had planned for the action level.
I was just looking back through mine because it's been a few days, and I'm not that consistent. Sometimes I say it's, you know, highly cost effective. Sometimes I generalize a little bit. Just depends on the strategy. And I think that I'm wondering if the table, the spreadsheet tables, will those be in an appendix someplace? Because, you know, those have a lot more detail on them if people really want to know why something is on the list, which I doubt. I imagine very few people are going to go in and evaluate it, but that's going to be there for background, right?
It will be. We're not entirely sure what, well, yes, we need to, Jane and I need to work on and think about how to clean them up and have them look somewhat consistent across subcommittees because they look quite different. And there's, but the intent is to have those in an appendix so folks can reference them. So you're right. I think to your point and to Brahman's point about sort of, it's like this, it's all of the actions at the strategy level. And I think you can broadly assume that all the strategies are high impact based on the actions, but if folks want to see the specific action rankings, they'll have those in an appendix. So I don't know if we
for all
resolved
of the
anything.
strategy tables that I filled out, there's, you know, it's high level enough. There's nothing, I don't think there's anything in there that's like earth shattering or particularly, you know, would be contentious. So I guess I would just ask that everyone give it a look over to make sure I didn't miss anything that's completely inaccurate or too much of a stretch or whatever it might be, but they're pretty high level.
Yep. Let's see. This is strategy 4.
Are we expecting it's on these from the council? Are they done looking at this?
We don't have any more time on council agendas for them to review your documents. They'll be notified when this is posted on Tuesday or Wednesday, and we'll let them know that the tables have been added. So folks may take a look at them and provide comment, but we don't have any more time to discuss this content. Okay. So I guess just because it sounds like, you know, the ones that Brown were worked on, and I know that for pathway 3 as well, they are a bit more general. There wasn't anything earth shattering. Are there pathway leads or folks who worked on tables who do have specific questions that you all want to raise up with the group or talk through with anyone? I think now would be the time to do so. Or any that haven't been completed yet where you need assistance. I can scroll through now. I didn't see any that were blank, but can just make sure.
I definitely have a few that I just gotta go double check, and
okay, great.
I plan on doing that on either over the weekend or Monday.
Okay, sounds great. Yeah, generally it looks like they're all here. We have some new edits in the document, which is great. Yeah, so there's a couple. What is this pathway 5? Looks like
There's,
co-benefits.
yeah, there's a few in the housing that, yeah, I just because housing is this, because housing is sort of this, like, it's housing and it's in resilience and it's sort of like, you know, this fundamental basic, people are more resilient if they're housed. It was a little harder to follow a thread with all the other pathways. It seemed like it's pretty easy to follow a thread around the co-benefits, around the cost effectiveness, around the impact, but for housing, it's just the language just requires it to be a bit different. So I'll have to go in and figure out what I say there, and it might be very repetitive because I think the co-benefits are everything else. Every other outcome that we would like is enabled if individuals are housed.
Strong statement for co-benefits. Great. So, yep. So with these, so Erica and Bronwyn, it sounds like we're going to take a look at them again. Again, encourage all the subcommittee members to take a look at these tables because we haven't gone through them in great detail and the council doesn't have time to verbally comment on them. It'd be great to just have your input. And these will be due at the same time as other edits. So, you know, end of the day, Tuesday. And it's great to work in the shared SharePoint document if you can, but feel free to also send me edits via email and I can incorporate them. Okay, we're a little ahead of schedule now. So anything else there? It's a quiet group today. It's the rain.
The rain. I'm like texting my husband like, help, bring me coffee.
I think it's because, you know, it's in really good shape and the document's in really good shape.
Yeah.
It is in good shape.
Exactly. So I think I have the next item on the agenda, which will be really short. So one of the appendices for the CAP is going to be a definitions and glossary of terms section. So I've been working with some other DEC staff to pull out any terms that subcommittees flagged to be defined in the glossary of terms. I don't think drafters and rural resilience specifically flagged any terms, but I think you all saw a couple of highlighted words as we were scrolling through the shared document. I've started to go through and do those. We're talking with the steering committee this afternoon about the approach for that glossary of terms because it will likely be a big lift to have the list of terms approved and then definitions for those terms approved as well. So Jane has an approach that we're going to talk about with the steering committee this afternoon, but it may just look like approving a list of terms and then working on definitions after December 1st. But I just wanted to flag that as you all are making final edits, if there are words that you think are really important to include in the glossary and definitions that you think are important as well, please send those my way. The one I wanted to flag is to discuss with you all whether or not we should consider defining rural communities. I know we've talked about this in the past and there have been questions about how we define rural communities. We could leave it as it's sort of written and defined in the opening section that Erica wrote, or we could come up with a definition that's approved by the subcommittee. But I wanted to throw that out there and then just note that that's going to be work that continues likely after December 1st. But if there are any specific terms that we've used a lot in our writing that you all think should be included, please send those my way. Karen, go ahead.
I just wanted to note again that there is a statutory definition for rural community, which I believe it, and I can find the citation for you, but it's below 5,000 population. So that you may want to reference that. I'll try and find it.
That'd be great, at least as a default reference. And I know we had talked a lot about also meeting those with limited capacity, communities with limited, planning and sort of staff support. So we could, think about adding that. I think in actually some of our pathways, we refer to, like communities with limited capacity as opposed to saying rural, but.
It's one of those, other than classifying it and quantifying it as 5,000 or less. Any other way you define it is going to be more ambiguous.
Yep. But just noting, I know Jane got this question at one of our public events, is how do you define rural communities? So we're getting the question.
It'd be great to see a
In
map.
Vermont, you're in one.
It'd be great to see a map of that, just as a gut check. You know, you can sort of look at a map and go, oh yeah, I think that's reasonable, you know.
Mhm.
And
Yeah. So yeah, Karen, if you have that citation, that would be great to share, and we can at least start with that one. Okay. That's all I have for glossary. Anything you wanted to add on that, Jane? Just that we're talking about a steering committee. Great.
Do we have
Okay.
do we have a definition for resilience?
We're using what is in the Global Warming Solutions Act for resilience
Thank you.
and adaptation and mitigation. And that's actually, I think actually we should probably define hazard mitigation, because it's different than how the Global Warming Solutions Act refers to mitigation. So I have that one flagged already, and I'll probably just pull the FEMA definition if that works for you EM folks.
Great, thank you.
Great. Okay, that's all I have for that one.
Awesome. Next steps. So our final edits are due on is it the 16th? Tuesday. And the Climate Council is also meeting on Tuesday. I think I don't know what our next steps are after that. I think are we done for a little while?
Yeah, I'm curious for Jane to weigh in if you think so, but I think if we finish final edits, you know, if we'll post those on Tuesday or Wednesday morning. We likely won't hear, you know, if anybody has strong reactions to the strategy tables until later. So we may not have anything to meet about next Friday. And then what date is that?
You may want to just be prepared. Just keep a meeting on the books, but we can cancel it next week. If there's any other comments or questions that relate to our section that we need to run by the group really quick, then we may just want to keep that space on the books. But otherwise, if there's nothing to address, then we can take it off. We're going to want to, I think there may be some other overarching, like with the council's review of the whole plan, there may be something where we need to like schedule a meeting to have a discussion as a subcommittee, I would think. But barring that, we may not have a reason to meet as a subcommittee until after the plan is finalized.
Right. Yeah.
Holy moly, that feels good.
yeah, and don't forget, we'll be off 2 weeks from today. State offices are closed.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, so we won't meet that day.
Sorry to be late. Did you guys cancel the meeting?
We just realized that we're like almost like done. Almost done.
We stumbled into the finish line, yeah.
It's never done. I'm sorry.
Well, for now. Karen, I saw you just put a thing in the chat but your hand is still up. Is that an old hand or a new hand?
That's an old hand, but
Okay.
I just put the definition from chapter 117, the planning statutes, in the chat.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, so I think Erica, so if we can hold next week's on the calendar just in case there's anything that comes up. As Jane said in the chat, they'll likely gonna just review your section, the new versions and the sections as part of the full draft, which they'll get on the 23rd. And we're a little unclear about how the flow of that's going to work leading up to the week. Where December 1st is on a Wednesday, and then they'll adopt the plan. But I think safe to plan on obviously not meeting on the 26th, tentatively holding next week, and then TBD after December 1st.
Yeah. Then we'll, I mean, I think we've earned a little bit of a break as a subcommittee, but I think Catherine and I will want to meet with Jane and Marion at some point after the plan is finalized, and we can talk about next steps for the subcommittee in general. Hopefully it won't be as crazy in terms of a schedule.
Yeah, so the only question I'll ask, and now that Chris is here too, and Bronwyn, is that Tuesday's meeting has a substantive focus on compact settlement, as it's largely the most fleshed out of the cross-cutting pathways. So if issues and gaps and challenges arise, I imagine that's what the council will bring forward. So I don't necessarily think this group needs to meet to discuss that, but there'll need to be a response to prepare for that for the following week as part of the comprehensive draft that goes on the 23rd. The council, we're asking the steering committee this afternoon at 3 o'clock for a council meeting on Monday, the 29th, which isn't on the books right now, but it seems like a major oversight right now because the council receives the draft on the 23rd and then comes back on the 1st just to adopt it. So Marion and I both agree that we need to have a meeting on Monday for any last minute changes or issues and see testing consensus so that then Marion and I had 2 days to make those revisions for a clean draft for Wednesday the 1st. And then just for folks' interest, we'll also be scheduling 2 more council meetings for December, the following 2 Tuesdays in December. That'll be focused on ARPA dollars and recommendations around how to prioritize the ARPA dollars that we have available for the climate action plan for this year.
That's a meeting I want to go to.
I'll be there. Well, Bronwyn, you have your hand up.
Are we wrapping early?
We're wrapping early.
Well, I guess I'll just drop this then. So in thinking about what I would like folks to review in these strategy tables, and so this is a comment and a question, I guess. One of the things that I'm noticing in my strategy tables as well, and I think this will probably be true throughout the entire document, is how we talk about the terms and used by Just Transitions. And so I know I've used frontline communities, BIPOC communities, marginalized communities, impacted communities. I think it would do all of us really well to just think really intentionally about the terms that we use and be consistent. So I can see some instances where it makes more sense to reference frontline communities, like the broad definition of frontline communities, but there's other places where it really does make sense to reference BIPOC communities specifically, especially when we're talking about correcting historic inequity. So I would appreciate that if, as you're going through these strategies, the strategy tables, to just, help me point out places where the language is inconsistent, or you think we're referring to the wrong group of people. I know that there's probably going to be an effort to copy edit this and look for consistent language. I wouldn't want that to happen outside of our edits, because I think it's easy for someone from the outside to say, oh, anytime you use BIPOC, it should be replaced with frontline. And I actually don't think that's the right way to go. So I think the more that we can be consistent and intentional about the terms that we use would be really helpful in keeping this consistent and meaningful, since it does, at least for me, it feels I'm still carrying some weight around not having done all of the work prior to this draft. So that's one way which we can put a little additional effort into this.
Thanks, Bronwyn. Agreed. Any other final comments from the group before we go to public comment? Okay, do we have any public comment today? Okay. I just want to, ahead of our final deadline on the 16th, want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart to all of you who have worked so hard. And I think we have a lot to be proud of in what we have produced as a team. And I will say that it has really been a pleasure working with all of you as a team to get to where we are. And I'm looking forward to what else we can do as a subcommittee moving forward. So thank you all very much. If we don't see you before the holiday season, or at least Thanksgiving, I wish you and your families a very warm and safe Thanksgiving. Be saying some gratitude for the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee this year. So
I will raise a glass this holiday season to do that.
all right, have a good rest of your Friday, and thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.